submission is from Democracy Action Incorporated from Lee Shaw.
Good morning.
Good morning, Lee. If you can turn your camera on for the committee, please.
Yeah.
Lee, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I'm trying to turn the camera on.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know why it won't turn on. This won't turn on, I'm sorry. Seems to have locked up.
There you go, Lee. We can see you now.
Oh, great.
Thank you for being with the committee. We have you for 10 minutes this morning. If you'd like to begin your presentation, I'll gladly start.
Morena, and good morning, Chair and the members of the Justice Committee. My name is Lee Short and I'm the Chair of Democracy Action. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this morning. Firstly, I'd like to begin by thanking the ACT Party for having the integrity and the foresight to give the people of New Zealand the opportunity to have a say on the principles of the treaty. The general public has never been given such an opportunity before now, despite the significant impact the principles, such as defined by the Waitangi Tribunal and the courts, are having on our constitution and our rights, including undermining the fundamental principles of democracy and equality of citizenship. This country belongs to all its citizens, and we, all of us, should be given the opportunity to determine the direction of our own nation. Democracy Action supports the bill, though with reservations specific to Principle 2. And I'll explain that in a moment. When the Tiriti o Waitangi was signed in 1840, a cloak of governance was spread across the country, unifying it under one government for the first time. As shown by the recorded statements of the rangatira at Waitangi and evidenced in the archives of the British and New Zealand governments, the more than 500 chiefs who signed were willing to accept the British system of law and government. This was confirmed and endorsed by the chiefs who gathered at Kahui for a month in 1860. All 112 chiefs present at the conference unanimously pledged to do nothing inconsistent with their declared recognition of the Queen's sovereignty and of the union of the two races. This commitment was reiterated a century later by Sir Apirana Ngata, who stated that Maori ceded sovereignty by signing Te Tiriti. During a speech commemorating the treaty's centenary, Sir Apirana emphasised the importance of this understanding, stating, "Clause 1 of the treaty handed over the mana and the sovereignty of New Zealand to Queen Victoria and her descendants forever." That is the outstanding fact today. Since the signing of the treaty over time, our country has evolved into an independent, sovereign nation with a democratic system where the authority to govern is derived from the people. For all intents and purposes, the term the Crown now represents the collective voice of the people of New Zealand, making all citizens a part of the sovereignty entity. We at Democracy Action support Principle 1. The Government of New Zealand has the full power to govern, and the Parliament has the full power to make laws. Our existing government system is under serious threat. There are moves afoot to transform the Constitution of New Zealand, aiming to establish a system of two separate race-based governments operating under entirely different systems to jointly govern the nation. The concept of dual sovereignty has been promoted by the Waitangi Tribunal, the Iwi Chairs Forum, in their Mātiki Mai report, and the Hipurapua report commissioned by the Labour government in 2019. This approach is further reflected in the policy of co-governance, which signals a departure from equality and democracy. The claim by some that such a transformed constitution will benefit all New Zealanders, that it is good for all of us, is not true. It is not to the benefit of other New Zealanders to lose our democracy and equality to a specific group and a nation divided by race. As warned by the former Labour Prime Minister David Lange in 2000, we can have a democratic form of government or we can have an indigenous sovereignty. They can't coexist, and we can't have them both. Our history is being rewritten. Various modern interpretations of the Treaty of Waitangi have fundamentally altered its original intent, that of unity and equality, transforming it into a tool of division instead. We as the people living in New Zealand today must stand against the notion of being governed from beyond the grave, to be required to follow a dated and disputed text. It is essential we all assert our right to self-determination, that we, all of us, have the freedom to decide for ourselves for our time. The idea of a well-defined guiding principles points in the right direction. Therefore, we submit Principle 1 advance to a nationwide referendum. Democracy Action also supports Principle 3, the right to equality. Principle 3 reflects Article 3 of the treaty, whereby all the people of New Zealand gained the rights and privileges of British citizenship. It is a clear statement of equality. The concept of equality has long been accepted as a key to a peaceful human society. This universal accord is made clear in Article 1 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Furthermore, the comprehensive condemnation of inequality based on race is found in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, in a statement by the General Assembly. And I quote, affirming further that all doctrines, policies, and practices based on or advocating superiority of peoples or individuals on the basis of national origin or racial, religious, ethnic, or cultural differences are racist, scientifically false, legally invalid, morally condemnable, and socially unjust. This is further emphasised in the last paragraph, which makes it clear that any claim to Indigenous status is secondary to the fundamental principles of equality and democracy. And I quote, the provisions set forth in this declaration shall be interpreted in accordance with the principles of justice, democracy, respect for human rights, equality, non-discrimination, good governance, and good faith. The idea of equality within our democratic system has faced significant challenges over the past 50 years. Equality has been gradually eroded. It has been compromised by both major political parties as they endorse policies that discriminate based on race. For instance, the National Party did so by repealing the Foreshore and Seabed Act and implementing the Marine and Coastal Area Act, while the Labour Party has demonstrated a strong commitment to separate race-based policies. There is nothing more precious to a people and a nation than the common belief of all that we are equal, that we, each and every one of us, belong here, that this land is our land, along with the commons, the lakes, the rivers, the beaches, the bush, the mountains, and the sea. Therefore, we submit that Principle 3 advance to a nationwide referendum. I will now address Principle 2, rights of hapu and iwi Maori. The Crown recognises the rights of hapu and iwi had when they signed the treaty Tiriti. The Crown will respect and protect those rights. Those rights differ from the rights everyone has a reasonable expectation to enjoy only when they're specified in treaty settlements. This principle raised significant concerns as outlined in our written submission. Initially, when the treaty settlement process began, most New Zealanders found settlements largely acceptable. However, since 2010, there's been an increasing trend to incorporate co-governance and similar arrangements into these settlements without consulting, let alone seeking the consent of the people. While we support cultural and commercial redress for treaty breaches, we do not support settlements that are of a constitutional or political nature. The move towards institutionalising a 50-50 co-governance model based on race poses a significant threat to our democracy by eroding the democratic rights of other New Zealanders. It disregards a critical principle of proportionality and contravenes Section 19.1 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, which guarantees freedom from racial discrimination. Moreover, with many settlements still pending, there is a risk that the provisions of Principle 2 can be used to circumvent the obligations specified in Principles 1 and 3. Therefore, Democracy Action does not support Principle 2 of the bill. It does support the party's original Principle 2 as outlined in the coalition agreement, and arguably the one ACT was elected to advance, which reflects Article 2 of Tiriti o Waitangi, and that is, the New Zealand government will protect New Zealand's authority over their land and property. In conclusion, we support three basic principles. They are: the New Zealand government has the right to govern New Zealand. The New Zealand government will protect all New Zealanders' authority over their land and their property. And all New Zealanders are equal under the law with the same rights and duties. We submit that these three principles advance to a nationwide referendum. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. We've probably got time for one short question from Jamie Arbuckle.
Thank you, Lee. There's been a number of submitters that have said that there's been other established principles since 1975, and there's possibly 8 or 9 of those. Where do they fit into this bill, and why wouldn't they go to a referendum?
I think we need to simplify the process, and if we can determine those three that I've read out to you, that would form the basis of going forward, and all other principles would have to fall under those principles.
Thank you, Lee. Look, thank you for your time this morning and for providing your presentation on behalf of Democracy Action Incorporated. The committee thanks you for your time. So we're going to move now to our submission from Te Kahui Tika Tangata Human Rights Commission, and joining us online we've got Brittany, and we've also got Dayle Takitimu. So kia ora kouroa, thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this morning, so if you begin your presentation, we can start now.
Kia ora tātou, mōrena. I am Dayle Takitimu, the Rongomo Taketake at Te Kahui Tika Tangata, the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, which is New Zealand's national human rights institution. We as such have an A status for independence and standing to speak at the United Nations on human rights matters in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Our job is to monitor New Zealand human rights and Te Tiriti as part of our country's human rights framework. With me this morning is Brittany Peck, our senior legal advisor. The Commission provided a substantial submission on this proposed piece of legislation of a very technical nature. I don't propose to read through that in its entirety today, but instead to make some salient points from that and then open up for questions. As an overview of the Commission's submission, we assert that Te Tiriti is a core agreement that affirms the place to belong and a place to stand for everyone in Aotearoa. It is the promise of two peoples to take best possible care of each other. This bill is not in that spirit. The rights and responsibilities agreed to in Te Tiriti are also human rights. This bill has been described by the Waitangi Tribunal as compromising potentially the worst comprehensive breach of Te Tiriti in modern times. These treaty breaches are also human rights breaches. The Commission is committed to building a future in Aotearoa where everyone feels they belong and we respect each other's mana, dignity and rights. The pathway to this future will be built on everyone in Aotearoa understanding, valuing and protecting Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This bill offers a very different and divisive pathway. The Waitangi Tribunal warned in no uncertain terms that this bill is likely to cause harm to race relations, social cohesion and to New Zealand's constitutional foundations, especially to Māori. Therefore, as you know from our written submission, the Commission opposes this bill and recommends heeding that warning from the Waitangi Tribunal, halting the bill and instead upholding a constructive, respectful and informed national conversation on Te Tiriti, underpinned by accurate information and public education with treaty partners at the table. We oppose the bill because it proposes to undermine and breach human rights. The bill would remove Māori rights that are affirmed in Te Tiriti and recognised internationally, including through the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Although one of the reasons that this has been advanced is to protect human rights such as equality, the effect of the bill would be to take away rights of only one group of New Zealanders, that is Māori. In failing to recognise tino rangatiratanga, it undermines Māori human rights to self-determination. In failing to engage with treaty partners on legislation that so significantly impacts their rights, it breaches rights to participate in decision-making affecting them. These human rights standards are protected through, for example, the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, for which New Zealand is a party, and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The bill selectively focuses on some rights while actively overriding others, namely the rights of Indigenous peoples that are affirmed in and fundamental to Te Tiriti. This is an unhelpful and erroneous approach to human rights. It is an approach that ultimately undermines human rights rather than advances them. Furthermore, the bill's interpretation of treaty principles is vastly different from any previous interpretations and those developed by the courts and the Waitangi Tribunal over the past 50 years. These interpretations ignore the historical context and do not align with the intention, spirit, or text of the treaty, nor do they reflect the original legally binding agreement and the premise on which Parliament itself is based. It ignores the unequivocal findings and directions of the Waitangi Tribunal and our international obligations. We note that Te Tiriti is the founding constitutional and human rights document of Aotearoa. The text of Te Tiriti aligns with core human rights principles subsequently enshrined in international human rights instruments, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Bill of Rights, which is made up of the covenant, the two covenants, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant of Social, Economic and Cultural Rights, as well as other United Nations instruments and commitments New Zealand has made. These principles include fundamental rights to self-determination, equality and non-discrimination, participation in decision-making, and cultural and property rights. The United Nations bodies recognise the status of Te Tiriti and its correlation with upholding human rights in Aotearoa. This is evident from the consistent and repeated urging by the United Nations to successive governments to recognise the fundamental right of Māori to self-determination. Furthermore, we note that New Zealand, in a horizon poll undertaken by the Commission in late December 2024, shows that a majority of New Zealanders, that 71% of those surveyed, believe it is important that Te Tiriti is protected within our laws, not redefined, I note, but protected in our laws. And a majority of people in Aotearoa want to see a respectful discussion of Te Tiriti and race relations rather than political rhetoric. And also, when asked about what is important for the future, most felt that harmonious relations through the honouring of Te Tiriti is important. That is 72% of New Zealanders responding to that survey. We note that the United Nations has also taken the special measure through the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people of writing directly to our Prime Minister to express their concern at the progression of this bill, and quoting from that letter dated 13th November 2004, the quote from that letter is, "We wish to express our deep concern regarding the Treaty Principles Bill introduced to Parliament on 7 November. This bill seeks to set principles of the Treaty of Waitangi in legislation and requires those principles to be applied when interpreting legislation. The Waitangi Tribunal found that if this bill were to be enacted, it would be the worst, most comprehensive breach of the treaty in modern times. In the view of the expert mechanism, this could raise serious issues of discrimination, lack of consultation, and potential breaches of fundamental rights articulated in the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples." The Vice Chair of the expert mechanism then goes on to the New Zealand government, as does the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, our advice and our guidance in ensuring that New Zealand stays consistent with its obligations, both under the original agreement of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and under its domestic and international obligations. Kia ora tātou.
Good, Dayle. Thank you. We've got two questions lined up. The first from Todd Stevenson, then Takitimu.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. I'm just curious, I want to talk about page 7 of your submission, and you talk about the text of the treaty is clear, that's great. You talk about Article 4, which I'm not going to go into, but I'm just interested in your comments on this statement. It is clear from the text of the treaty that it was envisaged that 2 systems of authority would operate in unison simultaneously. And then it just says there's another sentence there, but what I'm curious to understand is, would those 2 systems of authority need to be democratic systems, or could they be something else? And does the Human Rights Commission have a view on that?
We can provide you with a view. It's probably something a little bit longer than a soundbite can cover into the panel this morning, but we can provide you with a written view on that. Look, that position is taken from jurisprudence, strong jurisprudence, obviously coming out of the Waitangi Tribunal, and you'll see in the footnote to those statements there also the Anti-Racism Task Force and the work that has been done. So there's a substantial amount of research that sits behind each of the statements in that submission, because we've wanted to ensure they're all defensible, and we can provide you with further detail around that. What was envisaged with the original treaty promise in 1840, as we know, we've had 185 odd years under the bridge since then, so things have progressed a certain way, which is why we're proposing and do support further discussion, further conversation around these issues. But the original promise and intent of that is still intact. Kia ora.
Thank you. I'll be interested in that. Thanks.
Thanks, Dale. Look, that's probably all the time we have for this morning. Takita, I'll hold questions for you over for the next couple of submitters, so I'll prioritise you there. So thank you, Dale and Brittany, for being with us this morning. We appreciate your time. We're going to move now to submission from Te Whakakitenga or Waikato Incorporated, and this is a submission joining us online, and we should be joined by Tuku Morgan, Jamie Fergusson and Donna Flavell. Kia ora, Donna, good morning.
Kia ora,
Jamie.
morena.
Now, we've got you for 10 minutes this morning. I'm happy to wait for Tuku. Oh, there's Tuku there. So we have you before the committee for 10 minutes this morning. I will hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Kia ora rā tātou. Tēnā anō koe tau katoa. Ko Tūkororingi Morgan tōku ingoa. I'm the chair of Te Aratau, the executive board of the Whakakitenga o Waikato. It's the governing body for 33 hapu and 96,000 tribal members. It's ironic that the panel are having to deal with this at a time when we are soon to celebrate 30 years since the successful negotiation of the first treaty claim to this country, the Laupatu settlement negotiated by Sir Robert Mahuta. I'm here alongside Donna and Jamie to vehemently oppose the proposed principle of the Treaty of Waitangi Bill, A, because it undermines our rights, interests, and the protections that were guaranteed to the iwi hapu under the Treaty of Waitangi. I'm here today to send a clear message that that the committee should reject this bill completely and totally. There are some, Mr. Chairman, there are some compelling arguments against this bill. It does not reflect a credible interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi or its well-established principles. Rather, this bill seeks to supplant those principles which have been long established by the Waitangi Tribunal and courts and have been widely applied, including as a foundation element of treaty settlements throughout Aotearoa. The Tiriti o Waitangi was formulated to recognise the special and inherent connection that iwi, hapu and Māori have to the whenua, wai and wider environment, and to enable iwi and hapu like ours to work in partnership with the government to protect and acknowledge the rights and interests held prior to 1840. I began this submission acknowledging the fact that it's nearly 30 years, and as I reflect back, just under 1.3 million acres were taken from Waikato. We were the first iwi to usher in the settlement process. We not only had our lands taken, but we had the most important taonga of all, and that's our tupuna awa, the Waikato River that provides 70% of the water into Auckland, and that provides at least 30% of this country's GDP through its economic providing economic sustenance to the agricultural sector and the energy sector throughout the country. So we are in a special place. We're the only the settlement that was signed by the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. It speaks to the importance of the partnership in the Crown and iwi and hapu, and so as I reflect on the 30 years, the Raupatu came as a result of a series of hostilities which began at Rangiriri in 1863, which drove people of the Waikato not only from our lands, but forced us into the King Country. It resulted in intergenerational hurt and mamai that we've had to carry for the last 161 years, and has had a devastating intergenerational effect on our economic, cultural, social, and environmental health and well-being of our iwi. And as I think about the passing of the late Kingi Tuheitia last year, he called a series of hui, which was better described as kotaitanga hui. And these hui were premised on his deep despair and outrage over what this bill that was promoting, and that is to supplant all of the good work that's been done in the last 30 years and jurisprudence over the last 30 years by not only the tribunal but courts in this land. But Kingi Tuheitia coined these hui as hui of unity, in a push by him to try and unite Māori across this country so that we can confront some of the nonsense and the ill-founded work and bills that have been promoted by this government. As I've said, Waikato strongly rejects and opposes the bill. And in calling these hui, the Kingi Tuheitia compelled iwi from the four corners of this country so that we could sit and talk together and find a common place and a unified position to reject clearly and undeniably our outrage and our opposition to this bill. So I'm going to ask both Donna and Jamie to add to what I've just said, and then we'll go to some questions. Kia ora.
Jamie, Donna, would you like to add anything further?
Yeah, I'll get you. I would like to add something. I think just in terms of the settlements itself, and Tuku's pretty much covered most of it, but in our 95 settlement, which Tuku has reminded everyone it's 30 years, the Crown expressly sought to atone for those injustices from the Raupatu, and as Waikato's treaty partner, to enter into a new age of cooperation with not only Waikato but also the Kingitanga, because it was the consequences of that unity that actually devastated our people. The two settlements and the redress provided were negotiated and agreed on the express understanding that Te Tiriti and the principles that currently exist have ongoing application and continue to give rise to contemporary obligations on the Crown. In fact, the Crown has committed itself to a partnership with Waikato that is innately based on Te Tiriti and its principles. For example, we have a Kingitanga Accord, which was entered into between the Crown and Waikato alongside our river settlement, which expressly provides and includes Te Tiriti as one of its principles and states that Te Tiriti and its principles apply to the relationship between the Crown and Waikato. Our 2010 Waikato River Settlement Act further recognises that these principles underline the new regime created by the river settlement, and it is our submission that the bill fails to understand or account for any of these unique features. So therefore, it is our view that the proposed bill will have a direct impact on our ability as Waikato, as a treaty partner, to maintain, uphold and implement the rights and interests that have been recognised, prescribed and protected under both the treaty and our settlements to date. So hand over to Jamie if he has anything else further.
Conscious of the time, members of the committee, I think Tuku and Donna have covered the key points, and I think there were some questions that members wish to ask, so I'll allow time for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. We do have 2 questions lined up if we have the time. We'll start with Takitimu first, and then if we have a chance, we'll go Hehir London.
Tēnā koe Tuku koutou ko tā tira. Tuku, you speak to the importance of the Waikato Tainui settlement, and it's not incidental or by accident that Waikato Tainui were the first to settle, or that, as you mentioned, it is indeed the Queen's signature that's on that settlement. And these are not small things when talking about discussing the sovereignty and constitutional rights of individual and independent nations. These things are somewhat lost or not broadly known by the public, but it speaks to how important it is to the sovereign on the other side of Te Tiriti. Given you were here on Monday for the settlement of Ōrākau and the acknowledgement there, and that indeed these are apologies, and yet here we are today having this discussion, how does this make you feel?
Oh, it's actually hugely despairing when we have entered into 2 sets of supposed to be enduring partnerships with the Crown, with the obvious, position of the Crown recognising their sins against us, and then having the late Her Majesty the Queen sign up to the fact that the invasion of Waikato in 1863 was illegal and unjust, makes this situation today hugely despairing. And so, we've had to carry the mamai, the hurt, and the pain and the anguish for over 160 years. These incidences of injustice are weaved in our songs, in our whakapapa, in our history, and have been fed to us over time since children. And yet you have a government that is promoting this nonsense that serves to do one thing, and that is to undermine
Sorry,
a covenant signed between us two.
We're a minute over time now, so we'll draw the submission to a conclusion, but just kia ora koutou. Thank you all for being before us today and providing your submission. We do appreciate it.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Members, we'll move on to a submission now from Toitu Te Tiriti, who are joining us online. They're in the room already. Edu Morena, thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you to begin the presentation.
Morena, Edu Kapa-Kingi, Aupori, Ngapuhi, Kamatu, Whaipanga, Tuna Kiroto, o ngā iwi o Waikato te whānau Panui. I was that fella who was part of the team that led the hikoi a few months ago. And in many ways, the submission is what we would call in Te Ao Māori, he maumo taima. Yeah? Partly because we already did our big submission in November when over 100,000 people stood right outside of where you're all sitting now in the name of Te Hikoi mō Te Tiriti. And even more, we're engaged here and around the world, showing their solidarity through social media. So that, to me, to us, is the most Māori and most important submission. Speaking with our actions and giving mauri to our kaupapa. So make sure you include those numbers in your count as well. Moreover, and this is not to take away from how proud I am of my whanaunga, as well as tangata tiriti who have stood on the side of justice in opposing this unjust bill, I know deep down that today I could give the most articulate and moving kōrero and it would not change a thing. Why? Because that is the reality of advocating for rights of an, albeit beautiful, oppressed and minoritized people, even on their own whenua. We have the undisputable truth on our side that iwi and hapu never ceded their mana to any foreign power on any day in history. Your own tribunal affirmed that a decade ago. There was never meant to be a foreign government here to control Māori lives. But our harsh reality as tangata whenua is that having truth on our side is not the same as having power. Power is a numbers game, and numbers can supersede truth, which is exactly what this bill does. It is based on a lie and speaks into a void of misunderstanding. Speaks into a void of understanding and a void of knowledge, taking advantage of the fact that no one really knows the truth and history of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Aotearoa, a result which is by design. But if 82 people out of 100 suddenly decide in their minds that the sky is red, good luck to the remaining 18 in defending what we all know to be true, that the sky is in fact blue. That is the simplest way I can put our reality. What is playing out right now is dangerous and makes it unsafe to be tangata whenua. The irony, however, is that this is also an act of self-sabotage by the government. The only way you could ever be a thing is by way of te tiriti, ignoring for now the truth that you have overstepped your jurisdiction for almost 200 years. Trying to scrub out te tiriti through this bill is taking away the only means by which you could exist. And I encourage you all to ponder, if your authority to govern Māori lives can't have come from Te Tiriti o Waitangi, where does it come from? And when did you get it? Because it didn't happen in 1840 or any day after that. All of this goes to show all peoples in Aotearoa, especially you fellas, need to be comprehensively re-educated on the history of Te Tiriti. Only then can we have a just and fair kōrero and conversation. My final point, before we get into the pātai, do not get it twisted that our participation in this process gives it any legitimacy. Forced participation is not really participation at all. Realistically, we have little to no alternative options. Think about it like this. If you are locked in a burning house, of course you are going to try and put out the fire. We have indeed been white-mailed into a discussion within a government, neither of which should even exist in the first place. That's the perverse irony of our reality as tangata whenua. What this process does give legitimacy to, however, is racism. It has given a platform to racist people to be racist and spout their toxic, shameful, and misinformed views on Māori. We feel those today, and they will reverberate across our future generations. For that fact alone, all of you who sit in government and enable these spiritual attacks on our people should hang your head in absolute shame. Regardless, as long as my people breathe, Te Tiriti will live on. Te Tiriti is forever, and we are forever. Nothing can change that. Nothing can change the fact, the truth, that we never ceded sovereignty. Anei te iwi o te hikoi, A nei a Toitu te tiriti, e tuku nei I wana kōrero kia koutou e hui nei. Nā, ho mai he pātai.
Thank you, Edu. We've got a question from Takitimu first.
Are there any others?
No, you're not with them, sorry.
Mr. Chair, are there any other questions?
No, there appear to be none.
Ka pai. Kia ora Eru, me o kōrero. Ko koe tēnā e kōrero ana mō tētai whakatipuranga. Pehe ngā whakaaro o te tipuranga rā, tō tipuranga, mō te anamata me te haere o tō tātou iwi.
Anō ki au e kara e Doc, ko te anamata he rite kē ki te inamata, ki te ao o ngā tūpuna. Nā, I puta rā ngā kōrero I wanga I a tātou I Waitangi I te wiki rā. Ko te Hawaiki mokupuna e kōrero nei tāua, ka nui tōna rite ki te Hawaiki take take. Ka mutu he Hawaiki manawa hoki I te mea kei roto I a tāua, kei roto I te Māori. Tō tātou reo wā tātou tikanga, tō tātou tūhine ngaro, tā tātou titiro ki te ao, koia tēnā ko ngā mea te hakaora hia nei, te hakarauora hia nei, I waenga I ngā reanga o te wā, kia ki te mārama nei, te whenua taurikura e haere nei tātou. E rangi, e pēnei ana te kōrero, ko te ao, Hawaiki mokopuna nei, Hawaiki a pōpō, e tū takitahi ana te Māori I runga I tōna anō mana. Ka hore tūpau ana ki tētahi kāwana Pākehā I tōna nei tikanga, me kaua rawa I e tū ki runga ki nei whenua o tāua. E rangi anei hoki te kōrero. The liberation of tangata whenua, Māori independence, Māori liberation, does not also come at the cost of Pākehā livelihood. Te tiriti o Waitangi is not something to be feared by Pākehā people. In fact, it is their friend. And so what is good for Māori, what is good for tangata whenua, and what is good by the standards of te tiriti o Waitangi will actually lead to better outcomes, better lives for all people who live in Aotearoa. A world where we don't see such discrimination as we have seen in recent days against rainbow communities. A world where racism isn't enabled, as I said before, through government processes which gives them a false sense of legitimacy, but a very real sense at the same time. A world where no one is left behind. A world where there's not 2% of people who own almost 100% of the assets and hold almost 100% of wealth in Aotearoa. That's the world and that's the vision that my generation not only holds, but also moving towards e kara.
Ka pai, ho ka pai. Hey, just lastly, you speak about...
We've got a question from Huhana if you want to pass over.
Ka pai, Huhana.
Oh, no, Paiana, you carry on.
Okay, we'll go back to Tuck.
Okay, so you talked about not disadvantaging Pākehā. And in honouring the treaty, there is honour. And I believe that everyone deserves to be able to live in this country with honour. Can you just speak to that for a minute?
I think ko te kōrero I roto I a tāua I te ao Māori, he mana kei te katoa, he tapu kei te katoa. But mana and power are two very different things, right? I think the Pākehā paradigm of power comes, for one to hold power, another must be powerless, right? Whereas the paradigm of mana in te ao Māori is very different. Everyone can hold their own mana and be able to honour their own mana as well as the mana of others simultaneously. And things like a Māori health authority, though they might seem scary to some people, are actually for the benefit of everyone and will mean that we can all thrive in our own way in this home of Aotearoa that Te Tiriti created.
Kia ora, Edu.
Well done, Edu.
Thanks. Thank you
Well
for your
done, my
time this
son.
morning. The committee appreciates you being with us and thank you for your presentation.
Kia kaha, Toitu Te Tiriti.
We're going to go to
Just the
submission
chair,
now
point of
from,
order,
sorry,
just-
you're, Marimino, you're not whipped in.
No,
so
if
you-
I asked Dr.
No,
Lee.
Marimino, you're not,
Stop it.
no, Marimino, you're not whipped in, so you can't participate in the proceedings.
No, but she can, she
But
is,
someone has,
Out.
she's a member entitled to
Sorry.
be here, so she can raise a point of order.
no, she can't participate in the proceedings. Someone has to seek leave to allow her to participate in the proceedings.
Okay, I seek leave to allow Maramene Kapa-Kingi to make her point of order.
No, you need to seek leave to allow her to participate in the proceedings.
Well, I can seek leave for anything. You can seek leave for anything, and she clearly wants to make a point of order, so let's make.
Well,
let's
she
make
can't
it.
make a point of order until she's able to participate in the
I just sought
proceedings.
leave for her.
I'll seek leave for Marimino Kapa-Kingi to participate in the proceedings of the committee. there any objection to that?
No.
Thank you. Maria Mino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Point of order. Can you just clarify for me? So just earlier, when I was posing the question, and I've sat in these proceedings over the last while, of course, and we have been swapping out. And, you know, more recently, Dayle and I were sitting there, then we literally just swap out. Have things changed?
We had whips, the whips have sent through, I understand your office sent through a schedule of who the participating members are. Takitimu was 8 till 9 and you're listed for 9 to 10. And so unless the committee provides leave for other members to actively participate in the proceedings, members are entitled to be in the room, but they can't participate in the proceedings without leave.
All right, okay.
But now we've got leave of the committee, you are entitled to participate in the proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good to have that clarified. We'll now move on to our submission from Ngati Kahungunu Iwi Incorporated. And Bayden, thank you for jumping ahead and coming to the table. We've got you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you to start your presentation.
Morena, kia ora tātou. Kia ora tātou, I ka tātou me kaupapa. Ko whanganui ātara te maunga, ko waingongo o te awa, ko waimārama te marae. Ko tākitu te waka, ko Ngāti Kuruku, te hapu, Ngāti Kahungunu te iwi, tēnā tātou. I'm here on behalf of our iwi, Ngāti Kahungunu, one of the largest iwi in Aotearoa, around 100,000 of us. We span from Tiriti, to south of Gisborne, through Te Wairo, down into Hawke's Bay, Tamatea, Tamaki Nui Arua, and end there to Wairarapa. Second largest land space, second largest coastal area. We're here to, I heard Tuku's kupu, permanently oppose the treaty principles bill. Ngati Kahungunu, and I brought my tupuna here. Haruera mahi kai te tātere. Ngāti Kurukuru, Ngāti Whateapiti chief, who signed the treaty along with Te Hapuku and Hoani Waikato at Waipureku Clive in 1840. We're here to reject this bill strongly because it undermines and seeks to destroy the intent of what our tupuna signed. Our tupuna were rangatiratanga. They knew exactly what they were signing, and that they would maintain authority absolute. And I'll repeat that, authority absolute over their whenua, their moana, their people, their tikanga, their reo. And we're here to say that Kahungunu never ceded its sovereignty, its rangatiratanga. We held a hui a iwi back in December 2023 and reaffirmed the Declaration of Ngati Kahungunu Rights. It's too long for me to read, but I'd love to read it. I'll send it as an attachment. But it outlines that our mana tuku iho I heke mai. You know, it came from way before 1840. We've always had it. Takitimu waka landed in my backyard in 1350. And since our people have been on the whenua, we've maintained our rangatiratanga and our Māori manamutu hake. And so we reaffirmed that back in 2023, before Ngati Kahungunu sent 7 buses up to Tūranga Waiwai at the call of Ki Tuheitia to wānanga tahi, to wānanga around what this government was proposing to do. And so we're asking this government to reject this bill. It undermines who we are as Ngati Kahungunu. The Declaration of Kahungunu Rights, I'll just read just a couple of pieces from it. History and tradition teaches us that the hapu and iwi of Ngati Kahungunu have always possessed the mana to exercise the authority of sovereign peoples. That's the first part of the paragraph. History and tradition also teaches us that hapu and iwi of Ngati Kahungunu have always accepted the mana imposed both rights and responsibilities as kaitiaki in relation to the care and protection of ourselves as unique peoples. That all peoples of the collective hapu and iwi of Ngati Kahungunu have the right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely preserve their economic, social and cultural development. Look, we're here to say that our tupuna, when they signed the treaty, they were thinking about us here today, not so much themselves. Harawira Mahi Kai, before 1840, had spent the last 20 years fighting to preserve our lands and our mana motuhake as Ngāti Kahungunu. So they had come straight off the warpath into a new world, which required looking forward together. And so he signed. His older brother, Tiakitai, my other tupuna, didn't sign. So there were debates about whether we should sign or not. But he signed, and so I come to you as a tamaiti, or tamariki, or a mokopuna of the Treaty of Waitangi. And we won't let that, the tapu, the mana te ihi of the treaty be undermined or rejected by this government. And so Ngāti Kahungunu, 100,000 strong, are here today. We stand on the shoulders of our tupuna. Hoino, I'm looking at the time. I just want to, one of our ori, pene pene te kura. It's 7 verses long. It takes about 15 minutes to recite. Doc knows it intimately. But it talks about the whānautanga mai of our babies, of our mokopuna. It talks about their connection to their whenua, their connection ki ngā atua, their connection to their whakapapa. And there is no way that Ngāti Kahungunu can support this bill because it totally undermines our taonga tuku iho. E rā kōrero katoa. And so I'll put that there, pene pene te kura, hau te kura, whanake te kura, i runga o Awarua. The other thing I want to mention is our Ngāti Kahungunu haka, Tika tonu. It was composed by Waimarama Puhara, Ngai te Whateapiti Rangatira, Ngāti Kahungunu Rangatira. He wrote it for his son, Te Moana. And it talks about, and I'm talking to you, Te Committee, tika tonu, be true, be right, ue. Let's uphold it, stand fast, hold it tight. Yeah. Tika tonu, ue. And I guess our encouragement to the committee and to this government is to do that, is to be tika and be pono. Tika and pono is to uphold, kia whakamanahia nei te tiriti o Waitangi. Not to support this bill, whakamatea tēnei pire, hei oranga mo tātou. And when I say tātou, I'm talking about everyone. We te tauhuata talked about that. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, stand as one people, tātou e. Whai a te māramatanga me te aroha, look for understanding and love. Kia tapatahi, come together, work as one, go forward as one. Kia kotahi rā, be together in unity, tātou e. And so with e rā kupu of our ori, of our haka, and of our waiata ringa, anea kahungunu, e whakatena nei kia koutou kia tātou, kia whai haere, i ngā mātā pono, a kui mā koroma, wēnei rangatira, i tā moko tia nei, te tiriti o Waitangi, kia kauaka tātou, e whakatakahi nei, i te mana te hi te tapu, o tērā o ngā kawenata, te tiriti o Waitangi, te nā koutou, tēnā hui tātou katoa. And I'm going to give this haka a shortcut. Ringa e tarona kei waho hoki mai. Ika tonu uwe. Ika tonu uwe. Tika tonu atu ki akwe eta. Hiki ne koe kutaka pakeia. Hiki aha to hiki. Hiki roa to hiki. Heia. Eta ma te wawana. Eta ma te mā. Ro ina hokira. Teto heo, teto nā wana. Etau. Ana. Aue. Hei. Tēnā koutou, tēnā hui tātou katoa.
Bayden, thank you very much. And thank you for the timing too. That's left a bit of time for questions. We've got the one from Ruhana Linden and then Duncan if there's time.
Tēnā koe te hea mana. Me te mihi nui ki a koe te uri o mahi kai, a Waikato, a te hāpuku, a ngā tūpuna i haina i te tiriti o Waitangi. Getting quite emotional listening to your kōrero because you articulated through waiata, through haka and oriori, the metaphor of aroha, of the pathway to unity, and the fact that our tūpuna signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi with integrity and good intent. And so I wanted to ask you around the strain, you know, as an iwi leader and trying to maintain relationships across the district, locally and nationally, because you have to front on so many issues. You know, what is it like in the iwi space trying to maintain that kotahitanga, which Kahungunu articulates so clearly in these waiata?
He taumaha, I mean, it's a big job. Kotahitanga is where we need to go. But it's harder than, easy to say, hard to do. So it's a big job, but, you know, Ngati Kahungunu is part of a confederation of iwi. And so we look to our tuakana and our teina, Waikato, Ngapuhi behind me, you know, some of the biggest, powerfulest iwi in the motu. And, you know, together we're stronger. I think that's the key. But it needs to be based on the foundation of this country. The foundation is the treaty. If we can do that, nothing is impossible for us to achieve as Māori and as New Zealanders.
Kia ora.
Bayden, thank you for the time this morning. That's the time allotted, but we want to just acknowledge your submission on behalf of the committee.
Thank you.
Tēnā koe, tēnā
Kia
koe.
ora.
We'll go now to our next submission. Joining us online is Professor Andrew Geddis. Andrew, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We have you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you for your presentation.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to address you on this bill. I think my opening, well, first of all, I oppose this bill. I think it's a bad idea, and I don't think it should go any further. My initial comment is it looks to me like this bill is a solution in search of a problem. I really don't quite know what it is about the existing way in which the principles of the treaty have been included in legislation and interpreted that requires Parliament to act in this way. One argument appears to be that the principles of the treaty are somewhat complex and how they've been applied is context specific, and there's no nice simple way of summing them up. To which I'd simply say, come and sit in a public law class and see how the rest of government works. I teach, for instance, the Bill of Rights Act. Trying to explain in nice, simple, easy terms how the Bill of Rights Act operates within New Zealand's constitutional legal frameworks, you just can't do it. And it's context specific. It requires nuance, requires you understand the context, etc. The principles of the treaty, it seems to me, are no different. There's no way that you could expect something like that operating across multiple legislative frameworks in multiple contexts to be simple and easily applied, etc. It's just the nature of the beast. The second argument appears to be that these have been created and explained by courts, etc., rather than Parliament doing it specifically. To which, again, I'd say, well, yeah, that's how our constitution works. Parliament doesn't decide everything. Parliament quite often sets out broad frameworks, principles, etc., and then allows the other organs of the state to give them meaning in specific circumstances, etc. So I just don't actually see what the problem is. The solution then that is being proposed, I think, is actually just going to make things worse. Rather than giving clarity, rather than, you know, answering the problems and the questions, I think it'll just lead to greater conflict, greater uncertainty. It will actually make it harder for our system to operate. In my written submission, I sort of go through a sort of unpicking of why I think this is. I start off by addressing the place of Te Tiriti in our constitution, distinguishing between like the formal legal applicability of Te Tiriti, the treaty in our law, versus its normative or justificatory role. I then go on to look at Parliament's sovereign role in making law, the right of the majority to decide, noting how in our framework of government that hard right is the wrong way to put it, that, you know, hard role that we quite often say Parliament can make whatever law it wants is very much softened by parliamentary forbearance. Parliament just doesn't do certain things because it knows it would be constitutionally inappropriate or wrong to even try. And that allows us to say Parliament is sovereign, while never having to confront exactly what that might mean if it, quote, went too far. I then look at the content of the bill, noting, as many others have, that it's essentially a fiction. The way that it says the principles of the treaty are to be understood and interpreted actually bears no real relation to Te Tiriti and its historical understanding, why it was signed, what it was meant. There are a set of principles that actually are not principles of the treaty. They're principles of an entirely different political philosophy, masquerading as treaty principles. And all of that then leads me to, I guess, a quite fundamental question, which I think if this bill was ever to become law, would inevitably have to be answered, which is, look, can Parliament actually really do this? It's creating a fiction that is designed to empower the executive to evade its obligations under Te Tiriti. That's the only reason it's been enacted. So it's been enacted in bad faith. It's got one partner defining the effective terms of Te Tiriti without meaningful dialogue with the other. Is it appropriate or even possible for one partner to basically retroactively say this agreement means something fundamentally different to what it meant at the time it was signed, given the nature of this agreement and the role it plays in our constitution? And then finally, the effect, I think, of the bill is to act as an ouster clause. I mean, the whole point is to try to keep the courts from doing things in this area. And Parliament trying to oust the courts from areas traditionally has been one of the things that has courts saying, well, you know what, we're not sure you can do that. We might not let you do it. So my general point is that if this bill was ever to become law, you'd basically be setting up a much, much bigger constitutional clash. And do we really need to do that? You know, is there something about the way our country is at the minute that justifies taking things to the brink in that fashion? Looking around the world, I'd say attempts to create constitutional clashes and constitutional cliffs are not a great idea. And if you can avoid doing it, avoid doing it. So, as I say, I'm not sure what the problem is. I don't know why the solution is needed. And I think the solution is a bad solution that will create more problems than we have at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Look, I'll also endorse your call to take a public law class with you. You never know. You never know where you'll end up. We've got a few questions lined up. We'll go Todd Stevenson, then Dr. Webb, then Tuku first.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for your submission. It's very comprehensive. Just to kind of pick up, and this is really what you're talking about at kind of paragraph 29 and what you've just presented in your oral submission, basically saying, does Parliament have the authority to define the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi? What would be your view then on Parliament just removing all references in all legislation to the phrase treaty, principles of the Treaty of Waitangi? Would it have the authority to do that as well or not?
Well, I think it could. Of course, doing that then has to notice the dicta of the Supreme Court that says we're at a place in our constitution now where Te Tiriti, the treaty, is so fundamental to how our public institutions work that even in the absence of an express treaty clause in legislation, the presumption is that legislation will be made to work consistently with the Te Tiriti and its principles. So I think we're at a point in our constitutional arrangements now where the treaty has taken on a role in a life such that Parliament explicitly recognizing it is not necessary for it to have legal meaning.
Thanks, Andrew. Dr. Webb, then.
Tēnā koe, Professor. Look, there's been some discussion around kind of the authority of the Crown or Parliament and where that might sit. And it's been pitched as an either or in terms of autonomy, tiranga, tiratanga, and the authority of the Crown. Do you think those two things can coexist? And are there perhaps international examples of that?
I think this is what we're working through at the moment. And I'm not sure that we can have a definitive answer until we try to work through it. I mean, if we pose these as being two sovereignties that are absolute in and of themselves, then inevitably they can't coexist. There's a clash. One has to sit above the other. I mean, it's going back to Hobbes, right? And sort of classical liberal philosophy. Someone in the end has to give an answer. If we see these things as being, in essence, look, we ended up in this place where there are two ways of doing things, and now we have to work out how those two ways of doing things are going to coexist. And that's going to be messy, that's going to be difficult, it's going to be context specific, it's going to take trial and error. Then yeah, I think you can muddle through it. Now, can we see ways that this has happened internationally? Frankly, I'm not that interested in how other places have tried to do it, because I think if we go looking for other solutions in other places, frameworks, and try to put them down in New Zealand, it's likely not to work very well. I'm much more interested in how we've started to try to do it in New Zealand through things like co-governance, through things like local frameworks of co-shared decision-making. How do those work, and how can they then be built up?
Kia ora.
Kia ora, Andrew. Probably time for last one from Peck.
Hey, kia ora, Professor. It's great to have your clarity in the discussion. I'm wondering if you might be able to just clear something up for us, in as much as the treaty is being presented as somewhat of an issue of race and ancestry. Could you just give us a quick definition, I suppose, of what the treaty actually is at that sort of foundational constitutional level?
Sure. So the treaty was an agreement between two ways of governing, two ways of ordering social lives, one of which happened to be used by Maori because they were the people of this place, one of which happened to be used by Pākehā British because they'd come from somewhere else and did things in a different way. Those aren't race specific, they're culture and place specific because of how they developed. So it's not an agreement between Maori as brown-skinned people and Pākehā as white-skinned people. It's ways of doing things in the world and how those two ways of doing things in the world are going to exist together.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Takitimu. Thank you, Andrew. Always good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Kia ora, appreciate it.
Now going to invite our submission from Te Runanga iwi o Ngapuhi. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for being with us this morning and for waiting so patiently this morning. I'll let you get settled in at the table. I'm not sure who's going to kick off, but I'll hand over to you for the 10 minutes to start your presentation. So,
Ki te te rongo mai whiti o tēnei wānanga, tukura kia ea, tukura kia oi, ko rangi nui e tui honai, ko papa tuanuku e takoto nei. Tūturoa whiti whakamaua kia tina.
Tina.
Haumie, hui e,
Taiki e.
O tuatahe ka tuku mihi ki a koe e oho mai rangi. Nau I whakaarahia ia tātou I a Ngapuhi tēnei ata nei, tēnei te mihi o tō te matatanga o tēnei wahanga mō Ngapuhi. Tēnā ra, e te rangatira. Tēnā koutou, the committee, we thank you for the opportunity to present to you and for your time and attention and focus on this issue in general, but certainly on our position on this bill. So here with me today, I'm Wana Tūwhare. I am the tumu whakarai o Te Runanga iwi o Ngapuhi. I hail to many of the hapu of Ngapuhi. I'm a descendant of a number of treaty signatories. With me is Oho Mairangi, one of our mokopuna, and we are very much in Ngapuhi focused on the supporting our mokopuna and encouraging our babies to take leadership roles. With me is Mane Tāhere, the chairman of Te Runanga iwi o Ngapuhi. Alva Pūmare, our whaia is a stalwart in our communities and here on behalf of Ngapuhi Iwi Social Services. If I may, I want to just signal that we speak today as Ngapuhi and that Ngapuhi hapu are independent in their own right. Ngapuhi whānau hapu and individuals have submitted in their own right. We are not here to override any of those submissions or that kōrero. We are here simply to support and endorse our people and their position. The submission we have submitted would like to have taken as read. There's some key points that I would like to reinforce. In terms of the use of our time, I would ask that we will hope to take about 5 minutes. We would then invite questions from you all, and we're very keen to answer any questions you may have in the time frame that we have available to us. And we would like to save a little bit of time at the end for Mane to close our submission today. Kia ora tātou. So Ngapuhi are the largest iwi in the world. We have over 110 hapu. That is a severely reduced number of hapu. We originally had over 330 hapu by the written records of a couple of centuries ago. We have over 100 marae. We have over 185,000 people in terms of our population. We believe that's an underestimation of our population, that we're more likely to be in the 200,000 plus in terms of the numbers. We are therefore 20% or very close to 20% of the whole of Ngai Māori in this country. We are not a settled iwi. This bill has distinct implications for us in that regard. We are also the first iwi to have direct contact and relationship with the royal family. So our tupuna started well before 20 years prior to the 1840 signings to establish a relationship with the British monarchy. That relationship culminated in things like the 1831 letter of many of our rangatira to the king of the time, seeking friendship and protection. That request was immediately answered by the appointment of the British resident James Busby. The British resident supported us to select a tekara. We wear tekara here as a symbol of our independence. Tekara is the first flag of this country. It is now known as the flag of the Declaration of Independence of the United Tribes. And we selected that flag to become an internationally recognised trading nation, and we were in active trade relationships prior to 1835. And in fact, the Ngapuhi economy was in an absolute boom period in the lead up to 1840. So just wanted to make sure that the context of the signing of the treaty is understood. In 1835, again, James Busby was instrumental in supporting our rangatira to design, write and sign He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga o New Tiriti, or the Declaration of Independence of New Zealand. That became also internationally recognised by the time 5 years later, and I just want to highlight that in the Declaration of Independence, we reserved to ourselves, our rangatira reserved to themselves, the ability to delegate kāwanatanga, a function of government, to persons appointed by them. 5 years later, they delegated a function of government in Article 1 of the treaty to Governor Hobson and retained to us our pre-existing rights of tino rangatiratanga in Article 2.
Kia ora.
Just very conscious of our time, so I don't want to, I'll hand it over to Alva.
Therefore, Ngapuhi totally condemns and rejects this bill and the blatant violation of the tapu and mana of our tupuna who signed He Whakaputanga me te tiriti, and the mana of the change makers who ushered in a new era so that whānau could experience equitability and enhanced well-being. Our dedication to advocate for the rights of our mohopuna, of our tamariki, whānau and Kahui hapu will always outlast any government and any attempts to dismantle Ngapuhi. No government, no law and no colonial agenda will ever erase the tino rangatiratanga and manumutuhake o Ngapuhi.
Kia ora, invite questions.
Thank you, folks. We got any questions from the committee?
Tēnā hoki koutou te ruranga i o Ngapuhi me tō koutou haere mai ki mua I te aroaro o tēnei komiti whiriwhiri. It's wonderful to see you come face to face as the largest iwi in the world alongside our Tainui cousins and Kahungunu. Kia ora tātou. Just exploring a bit further in terms of, your explanation, Moana, around our understandings at the time of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It's not something to be threatened by, the fact that there was an intention to delegate governance, but actually there's a mahi-tahi space still within there. Can you share a little bit more around those whakaaro at the time and what we've seen in terms of the division that's occurred since with the assumption of sovereignty here in Aotearoa?
Kia ora, and it comes directly to how do you have two jurisdictions that are, seemingly absolutely distinct and different in their operation, and how do you bridge the gap between those two jurisdictions where there's overlap? Absolutely, our tribes were committed to figuring that out as we went. The treaty itself does not go into detail around how this kāwanatanga sphere on the one hand and the rangatiratanga sphere on the other hand was meant to operate in concert with each other in the overlapping spheres of influence. So what we absolutely hold fast to is that the whole preface of the treaty is protection, peace and prosperity. That overlaid with that is all of our tikanga I roto I te ao Māori of tino rangatiratanga, which behoves upon us to work together to maintain relationship. The relationship is the absolutely fundamental and important. So how we, like any relationship, we work at it. We communicate with each other, we learn how to understand each other, we learn how to, compromise, so on and so forth. So it's pretty simple. It's not any different from any of your relationships with your families, your husbands, your wives, your cousins, the world that you exist in.
Can I ask?
Thank you, Mane. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Mane to close us out. That's right.
I won't say my kōrero. Just one thing, last thing from me really is, once this kerfuffle and mess is done with, I invite the government to Waitangi to come and tell to us our face your decision on Te Paparahi o Te Raki Stage 2 report, whether or not we see the sovereignty or not. I am a descendant of Tautahi, Te Wairua, Te Hota, Te Hongi. Listen to my words and this haka that I'm about to do. Hiko hiko te wira papa te whatatiri. Hiko hiko te wira kirunga o Ngapuhi e. E kore raua, e riro. He kai mō tāhai, he kai mō raupatu. E muru te dua e. Ko tautahi. Ki te whenua, tautahi ki runga, taku whare ko te atua, hui ha ha! Wā, hiko te wira, te whakatiri, te runga,
So thank you for your submission. That's the time this morning. We appreciate your time and for being with us. We'll now move to a submission from Liam here. Liam's joining us online. Liam, I'm not sure if you're aware, but you are sideways at the moment.
No.
There you go. Now
Is it better? Okay. All right.
We've got you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you to begin your presentation.
Yeah. Right, ata Māori, and thank you very much. And I know that time is scarce, so I will keep it brief. Look, I'm a political commentator and a lawyer. I'm not a special lawyer. I'm not a theoretical lawyer. I'm just a everyday provincial general practitioner. But I do believe that these matters aren't esoteric questions. They're matters that are of concern to all New Zealanders, and that all New Zealanders do have the right to be heard on them and to make their opinions known. Look, when we come down to it, the original intent of Te Tiriti is a historical and not a legal consideration. The treaty was a was a political agreement. It was made in a specific historical context, and it's not a statute with precise legal definitions in the way that we understand in the English inherited legal system. The precise boundaries of the treaty and its intent are actually unknowable. But what's clear is that the Crown was invited to form some kind of government to extend its protection in some way, and the signatories had an expectation that at the same time they would retain their traditional prerogatives and their autonomy within that arrangement. I think in the early colonial period, history shows that there was a recognition of this dual authority, that it would continue in some form. However, mostly due to breaches by the Crown, the foundational basis of that understanding, including but not limited territorial integrity, was eroded and to the point where it can't be fully implemented now as it was intended, whatever that intent was. The original system contemplated by the treaty has been displaced, and the social structures of the Crown and Māori have evolved beyond what was originally envisaged. However, the successors to those to that political compact still exist. The Crown has perpetual succession, and we recognise that that iwi and hapu are the successors to the rangatira who signed the treaty and were the recipients of those expectations. And so limited recompense can be made, and I think we should all recognise that where settlements have happened, the settlements are pennies on the dollar of what was actually lost. And the ability to give effect to the vibe, I suppose, of the treaty going forward is limited by other considerations, including the needs of liberal democracy and universal human rights. So it is a difficult process, and it's a process that needs to be negotiated by the Crown as the executive branch of government, and iwi and hapu as the successors to the signatories of the treaty. So it's an ongoing political and diplomatic matter, and not one that I think is particularly suited to judicial rulings or referenda either. The judicial branch is uniquely unsuited to craft practical solutions in this space. When it interferes, the results are often counterproductive. And for example, the recent scandals at Statistics New Zealand show that it can be traced back to judicial intervention unbidden into privacy law, and show that there are unintended consequences of the judicialization of the treaty process. So you might think I'm in favour of the bill, but based on my general political leanings and that long preamble, but the reality is I'm not. Just as courts are unsuited to give effect to the political and diplomatic requirements of such a relationship, they're also unsuited to be determined by way of a referendum or by the population writ large. Look, a statutory finding of the nature that the bill proposes creates a legal fiction. When I say that, I mean it cements into law something as an objective truth, at least for legal purposes, when at best it's a contested understanding of historical reality, and that's being generous to the bill. There's an inherent problem with this. We use legal fictions in the law all the time. Perhaps the most well-known legal fiction is corporate personhood, the idea that a group of people can incorporate a company and that's a single legal person. And that's a convenience that enables the law to be administered properly. It gives advantages to our commercial and legal arrangements. Legal fictions shouldn't be used, in my view, to purport to settle questions that are, contested and will always be contested, and which always need to be resolved or worked through using dialogue. I would say that many opponents of the bill have articulated theories of government in New Zealand that, while common in legal circles, especially academia, are at odds with the expectations and the democratic expectations of ordinary people. I think the idea that the treaty is a pervasive legal principle that permeates the whole of the legal system is something that I think is something that we shouldn't just accept as a given. I believe that it's a political and diplomatic consideration first and foremost. But the solution isn't to double down on the use of a legal fiction or the use of the law. The solution is to actually have the more difficult discussion and to actually work out alongside iwi what exactly giving effect to the vibe of the treaty in 2025 and beyond actually looks like. I think that if the bill was to pass and a referendum was to be held and to succeed, then if in effect we are short-circuiting the system, we're doubling down, we're replacing one set of legal fictions with another, we're making the problem worse and not better. So, look, I'm just going to leave it at that. I want to. I did think about withdrawing my submission, but because I know people who said the same thing. But I just want to make clear that while a lot of people who oppose this on the left are on the left and come at it from a perspective that is a sort of centre left or left wing in its premises and assumptions, there is a good faith, very strong, I think, conservative or centre right argument against this type of thing as well.
Thank you, Liam. We've got some time for questions. We'll start with Huhana Linden.
Tēnā koe, Liam. Thank you very much for your submission and also the propositions that you've provided to us as a committee. And I'm really taking a proactive approach and thinking around solutions in terms of the need for the conversation between the parties that were signatory to Te Tiriti and looking at what it looks like today and now into the future. Do you have any feedback for the committee? Is it that, that the conversation should be entered into now? It's started and that a pathway needs to move forward together.
Well, the bill is a needless provocation, so the bill hasn't helped. But going forward, I think that you can't have a conversation or you can't craft a solution until both parties have the capacity to do so, all right? And so the first thing that has to happen is that the capacity for self-rule, for autonomy, to the maximum amount of autonomy allowed in the law has to be built. All right, the Crown has to give help iwi and hapu to rebuild the structures to actually be a partner. You can't take away someone's capacity to be a partner and then expect partnership. That's the first and foremost conversation has to be, how do we restore as much of the autonomy that was lost or taken as possible, and only then can you have a true partnership of equals. And I don't have answers for that, apart from the fact that it is going to cost money, it's going to be hard conversations, and it's going to have compromise on both sides.
Can I supplement on that? Thank you, Liam. You're recognising some of the daily challenges of hapu and iwi to engage in the existing system when there isn't capacity or capability to do so. Thank you for sharing that because it is hard on the daily to respond to the many consultations or the resource consents that come into our tribal territories. And taking on board your feedback around building up that partnership, do you recommend to the committee that there is a commitment to do that work now in earnest?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that, that commitment from the Crown shouldn't be sort of initiated because of this bill. It's a commitment it's had for a long time. It's an obligation I think it's had for a long time. I think if you look at early history in New Zealand, there were some, I think, well-intentioned, if not well-executed, and somewhat paternalistic approaches to do so. I think about the Runanga system, and that sort of support for a formal structure that's properly funded and which is able to make be a conduit for decision making that's efficient and timely, and doesn't create conflict and friction between the two treaty partners is a really important thing. Probably this bill sets it backwards, frankly, but I actually think that that is the long-term way to resolve the ongoing treaty issues in New Zealand. Is you have to have that political structure be developed and properly funded.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Liam. Thanks, Huhana. Thanks for your time this morning, Liam. It's really good to see you again. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We're going to now invite Stephen Franks up to the table. Stephen's going to provide us a submission to the committee. Morning, Stephen. Thank you for being with us. A small chance to get settled in.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. We've got you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you.
I'm probably going to do something which I urge my clients never to do. I tell them that if they speak it through the whole time, they're wasting their opportunity to have an influence, and they might as well not turn up. But I'm concerned that you're hearing so much from so many people that it would be enormously hard not to be repetitive. You have my written submission, and particularly on what I think is a technical problem of the bill. But I've been reflecting because I've sat in your seat. I was 6 years on the Justice Selects Committee. I chaired it through some difficult bills when the chairman considered himself conflicted. I've heard lots of submissions, and I sort of remember what helped and what didn't help. But what I remember most was that when the door closed behind the media and there was no public, that around the table of that committee anyway, there was a genuine concern to do what's right for New Zealand. And we could have discussions that were quite frank, and that I don't ever remember any of the concessions that were being made. I don't remember the implicit deal being broken, that we were sorting out who really knows what's best on this. And I found my time on the Select Committee enormously satisfying. I was never in power. I felt I served the apprenticeship and never got the certificate. But almost every bill, you could see something that reflected an intelligent discussion, because I'd had the good fortune of being a lawyer for so long. And I'm looking at this now, and I heard Andrew Geddis say that we should leave it to the courts. I've just heard Liam say that the courts are not appropriate for that. I hear that's a thread. Essentially, if the bill or if Parliament doesn't deal with the principles, they are saying to the courts, you determine these very important elements of our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, despite the fact that three of my former partners and good friends are on the Supreme Court, I think the judges are utterly unsuited to the role of determining constitutional issues. The magic of democracy is that the MPs are always looking forward, trying to work out what will happen with this, not what the rhetoric is. They know there's all sorts of bullshit rhetoric around slogans around bills, but how will it work? What will make it not work? And they take in information from wherever they can get it. You're spending hundreds of hours listening to people all over the country, and you're not filtering what they say pretty much at all. Courts are totally different. The whole legal training says I can make these big decisions because I work within a framework that excludes most of what people would say ought to be relevant. It doesn't get before the court just because it's true and relevant. It has to go through a set of formal hoops. The judges then apply to that logic, to a sort of logic that's predetermined. And ideally for a judge, the answer flops out without them having to put their own values into it at all. The answer flops out from the history, the facts, and the rules. That is totally different from the parliamentary role and from the role of a democracy. I want to give a couple of, I'll point to some examples. The thing that really worries me is that while I was in Parliament, the treaty issues for New Zealand and the way it's consuming us are a parliamentary inflicted disaster. We created it by reckless language, didn't know what it meant in 1975, didn't try and define it again. Judges did their best and then found what an opportunity it was, and now they're running with that ball. There are countries in the West seriously suffering. The leader of the British Conservative Party said yesterday that amongst the highest priorities is to, I'll just read it briefly, is the tolerance of things that will destroy us. My prime example is what's happening in the courts. We are having novel and expansive interpretations of law used in a way that was never the intention of Parliament. Parliamentary sovereignty is being eroded. Britain is in a chaos partly because they voted for Brexit and the courts then sabotaged it. For 3 years, they couldn't even get a deal. They voted strongly against mass immigration, and they've had 8 million people come in since then because the courts won't let them export or do anything about it. It's not just the UK. Israel has had a paralysis with their Supreme Court, where the elite, the media, political, academic elite, and the courts. The lawyers are on one side and the elected representatives on the other. The October the 7th attacks broke that deadlock. The Romania judges have just declared the first half of an election invalid without any statutory authority. In the US, Ruth Bader Ginsburg referred to the US judges unilaterally made their abortion law. The US is the only country that's anything like us where abortion is a big issue, because they have we have the same religions, so does Canada. The US judges decided what the law would be. They never had the democratic debate, and it never had a democratic mandate. And it's been a cancer in US politics ever since. And we don't have that here because we reached our fuzzy compromise in the abortion law system, and the Abortion Law Reform Committee, which had judges and doctors, used to come before us. I guess they still come before you, saying to us, give us law that we can actually work with, because we were outside the law all the time. But the politicians knew it's a poison. Don't stir it up. And I say our Supreme Court is utterly unwise. They've neutered our extradition and deportation law to the point where, I don't know how, a few years ago, I know for a fact that 6 of the most wanted fugitives from China for corruption were in New Zealand. And the Chinese government thinks that our courts must be paid off because they're protecting these people from deportation or extradition. And that the courts aren't set up to take nuance into account. It may be a really material fact that it seems that possibly in Australia and certainly in Canada, China has taken to simply snatching the people it wants. When China decides to do that here, how can we stop it? And the judges will piously say, we will make up a rule that you cannot extradite someone to a country that has the death penalty. China's not going to stand for that. And so I'm saying politicians need to recognise that they have a very special role in melding together a whole lot of things, some of them which no one will even talk about when they make decisions. And decisions on the treaty and what it means and co-governance and whether people get ancestral political privileges or rights to decide how other people use their land, and whether Article 2 meant classical property rights or some kind of permanent influence from a neighbour who can claim a fraction of Maori blood. All of those things are intensely political. They will be intensely important to whether we're a healthy country. And we've got to remember that there are very few. Someone asked, I think it might have been Andrew Geddis, can you think of any examples of countries where you share power in the way that's proposed? Well, I can. Iran, where a nominally elected government shares power with essentially a clerical group. And I think from my direct personal knowledge of lawyers, they think like clerics. That's collateral. If the outcome is bad, but you had the right motives and you applied the right rule, what actually happens isn't my fault. You know, I can give someone bail. It's not my fault if they went out and killed. It's not my fault if I apply the rules. That's a clerical mode of thinking. Who's a sinner and who's not? And there are many countries that are ruled by that kind of culture. I'm saying you're the lucky representatives, but also the unlucky representative. You represent ordinary people's instincts that someone's got to be the boss, and it must be the ultimate boss. And the countries where the families, the companies, the organisations where the nominal leader is not the leader and there's a tussle going on for control with others have spectacular failure, despite being rich in resources and people. And this country is heading for that. We are allowing the court to jerk around everyone else. We can look at this treaty area where it's obviously obvious, but very recently, the court has just let Fonterra and 7 other companies spend $9 million defending against a claim that falls squarely into the area of the Climate Change Commission and the ETS. And Parliament could have said to the court, get back in your box. You can't invent law like that, which they did in the Smith and Fonterra case. Instead, it's done nothing. It's allowing that to go further. There'll be another $9 million spent before it's finally tossed out. and it'll take 3 or 4 years. And in the meantime, people are saying, do I invest, or will the courts make something up that snatches my property? We don't know. We are in a limbo where our court is asserting itself and Parliament is not stepping back. So to those who say Parliament should not be looking at the treaty principles, my message is it absolutely should be, and it should be doing it very overtly, and it shouldn't be apologising for it.
Thank you, Stephen. That's the time this morning. We don't have time for questions, but just want to acknowledge your submission and thank you for that insightful submission. We do appreciate it. I'd like now to invite up to the table the Right Honourable Dame Shipley, who is here to provide us a presentation on the submission. Dame Jenny, good morning. Thank you for being with us before the committee. You're possibly quite familiar with how these processes run, but we'll have you for 10 minutes this morning and I'll hand straight over to you to begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Morena, and greetings to the committee. When I left Parliament 23 years ago, I couldn't conceive of the fact that I would then be in front of you as I am today. I'm here because I view this bill as unconscionable in terms of its proposal to rethink the way in which we engage as treaty partners without reference to the treaty partner in drafting this bill. And I use the word unconscionable because it's also a word that I used when I delivered the apology. And in saying so, I, addressed the fact that over 7 generations, the action of the Crown in not honouring what we had committed to was an unconscionable action. And I view the fact that we have this bill in front of us where we are proposing a different future in the way in which we treat this delicate, precious, creative, visionary relationship in a way that we think we can exclude the original partner and voice. By the way, for a party of 9% to be so audacious as to do this, I have to frankly admire the audacity, but condemn the notion that that is reasonable. And I also, in saying so, would say to the supporters of a party like this, they would never tolerate a third party coming in on a contract that they had signed and then deferred it or referenced it to another party with no interest and saying, well, now you can vote on it regardless of what we agreed. So I view the treaty as a notional contract, and yet it is a spiritual and committed undertaking. It is like any relationship. Often the two parties come together with a different lens, but they commit themselves to try and shape a different future where both can benefit and prosper. And so in coming back to this bill, I ask you to reject it at the earliest possible convenience, because I can't overstate the damage that I believe it is doing. And frankly, I find it heartbreaking that I've lived through a generation where there were giants in Maoridom who as leaders stepped forward and created a vision that we now sit and inherit today, and also political leaders. I think of Matt Rata and Jim Bolger and Sir Douglas Graham and Doug Kidd, and of course more recently Chris Finlayson, who worked with some of the giants who go way back, even Venn Young, who had the courage to say, in the context of the treaty, the loss of the language is indefensible, and worked with other Maori leaders to bring recovery. And our generation is now inheriting the success. And that's why I take deep offence that where we are starting to try over the last 50 years to rebuild some credibility around this relationship, that we would allow ourselves to be diverted. And the degree of depth and anguish and division, not only amongst Maori, and I'm very conscious that my colleagues from Ngapuhi are behind me, and my dear friend Miri, who I walk with together as we try and think our way forward in what the future looks like, as we learn from the past and let it inform the future. But as the treaty foresaw, this was a creative relationship. For those who doubt what was intended, I note our colleagues from Ngapuhi have talked about the call, the call went right back to 1831, where there was a need for protection and a degree of order, but still a desire to cherish the cultural difference that made us unique, but find a way to blend it together. That went through the 1830s. And of course, it's a must read to go and read what Normanby said to Hobson. Normanby's letter to Hobson is, in fact, the essence of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi. And if you read it, you will see Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 reflected in it. He then said to Hobson, go and begin the process. Hobson showed up in Kororareka, where I live. I feel the pulse of this conversation daily. He then said the 3 principles would advance, and in 8 days, took those principles into the formation of a treaty. The treaty was debated on the 5th, and Maori wrestled with this, whether or not it was in their interest or otherwise. And so we have an agreement that is shaped in many respects where we are today. But I want to also put, as I referred to in my submission, be careful. So please discharge this bill. But also as we look forward, there are 2 things that I ask. In our thinking about what the principles were, I don't view them as an intense legal framework. In fact, it's interesting and important to note that over the 185 years young that we are together, we have not sought to codify the principles of the treaty. Even Sir Geoffrey Palmer avoided codifying the principles of the treaty, and I think there's good cause not to do that, because the trusted relationship rests in leadership, not law. And in my opinion, if we codify the law or the principles into law, we hand it to the bureaucrats and to the judiciary. And we take the initiative away from leaders like my young friend here, the next generation of Maori leaders who are going to balance guardianship with stewardship, working with us all together as we shape a future worthy of the promise that the treaty foresaw. And so I simply conclude my comments. Great nations don't break their promises. I think that the promise of the treaty was profound, and it doesn't need some, second-hand car salesman to try and divert us into some notion that frankly is not worthy of the promise of the treaty. And I don't say that reference in person to the promoter, but rather how I view trivializing the importance and the intensity of this relationship. For me, a shared society where it's safe for difference, we cherish the undertakings that were there, we understand culture and heritage as we build a future together, are precious beyond belief. And look around the world, there are not nations who are gifted a treaty such as we have. I think the question is whether this Parliament is capable of seeing this bill off, but encouraging people into a space where we bring this conversation back together, where we can value and respect difference. This Parliament is already a manifestation of Article 1. It is one of the most diverse parliaments in the world. Maori are more represented than the numbers, and that's a success of the treaty. No political party thinks it's electable unless it has Maori and Pākehā as candidates, and that's a success. It's not in the law. We are living the treaty. People are seeing themselves in the context of the treaty. And my challenge to myself and all of us as we look ahead is to ask, are we participants in the treaty or observers? This bill, to me, pushes us back and uses abstract language like universal humanity. Be careful of the mischief of people who use these phrases, because usually it excludes culture and diversity. And I don't believe, I value the difference that I can bring to a conversation alongside my male peers. God, I fought for that over the 20 years that I was observing and then being part of the Parliament. So I ask you, take care, but also as political parties, as leaders of Maori, let's come back to the table, not get locked in our silos where it's an echo chamber and we are not fulfilling the promise that the treaty offers us and shaping a future that is worthy of the treaty itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Jenny. What we'll do is we've got some time for questions, some very quick questions. I'll take one from each side of the table. I'll go Mark Cameron and then Duncan Webb.
Always a pleasure, Dame Jenny, to have you here. You heard Mr. Franks earlier on in his remarks. How do you reconcile the remarks that he made about expansive interpretation in the courts? And do you think that's happening in New Zealand with our courts over the journey of the inception of the treaty and where it sits today, thinking of things like resource management law and natural assets?
Look, I do think we've got a big challenge, and there is, in the last 15 years particularly, there's been a rush to put principles of the treaty in specific legislation. And I would say to this committee and to the public, don't be afraid about asking the question, should we review where this has taken us to? I mean, I watch my Maori colleagues up north, they are exhausted in being dragged to the table to discuss things that are often not of any interest to them. But parties who are obliged by the law to consult are spending time and money that would be better put elsewhere, and then the courts are leading in with their own interpretation. The Parliament and leadership is sovereign here in shaping the future. So use the principles in law lightly. And I, for one, think that we should have an open discussion around whether they've served us well. I don't support the codifying. Generally speaking, I've seen leadership get us further more quickly, where Maori have come and discussed and formulated a view to a point of consensus and then agreed how the law should capture that, as opposed to the law being designed that forces us to then respond to the law and leave it to the judiciary to decide. So I do believe there's overreach of the judiciary, but it is in the hands of leaders, Maori and Pākehā, to guide the government and the Parliament so we get what we wish for, rather than inherit something that is sort of like a politically correct bureaucracy. And we do have a moment here where we can take a breath and take the time to think this through.
Thanks, Dame Jenny. We are a little over, so I will go to Duncan's question. Just
Good,
to
thank you for that. I liked almost all of your written submission as well. I'm really interested in your experience as Prime Minister and as really central to some treaty settlements. There's been discussion around the right of a democratically elected government to do whatever it wants.
Sure.
And some of the comments you've just made bring a much softer and more nuanced approach to that. And I'd really like you to talk about what you see as the constraints on the behaviour of what a good government or a good parliament should do in this context in particular.
You know, I was a young South Island Member of Parliament when I arrived here, and my knowledge of the treaty was about this thin. So we're all on a learning journey. And I come to your point that when we sat around the cabinet table and grappled with the Ngāi Tahu agreement, we could not have got there without, by the way, the outstanding work of the tribunal, that through its research and working with Maori were able to quantify the degree of loss and offence and impact on mana and property and every culture and language and every other aspect that could inform us to then make a decision. So there are pillar points, but when I delivered that apology and was aware that over 7 generations, the Crown that had said they would do certain things and then didn't, the depth of damage that does. So bringing it forward to your question, you know, we have to avoid that repetition. It's not an easy question for me to answer for you. But what I've learnt is that, you know, at that point where you are coming to a point of reconciliation, it is much more about the meeting of minds, not agreeing on everything, but the generosity of Maori of accepting less than 1% of the today value of the offence is extraordinary. People need to know that Maori time and again come back to the table trying to bring the treaty to life. And I, for one, try to stand in the middle, learning as I go, to give voice to both Pākehā and Maori, to understand the value that brings. So yes, the law needs to be clear. Yes, Parliament from time to time needs to stamp its authority, but Parliament usually follows. It doesn't lead, and when it leads, as it did when it was causing the offence that was I effectively had to settle in relation to Ngāi Tahu. When you get to that point, you realise that you might think you've got the authority, but if you move outside the scope of the treaty, you then finish up having to again go back and apologise for not being adequate in the undertakings. The nation we can be relies on people and leadership. The Parliament, if it does overreach itself, will find itself in the position I was, where it will be apologising for generations past in order to try and regain its footing and move forward. So tread carefully. You do have the authority, but make sure you've built the consensus as you exercise the authority, rather than the arrogance of imposing an authority only to then have to review the relationship, which is where our strength of a nation lies, and the creativity and possibility and promise ahead exists for my grandchildren and people ahead of us. So tread carefully, but lead with clarity.
Thank you. Thank you, Dame Jenny. We appreciate your time this morning. Right, members, final submission of this morning will be from the National Iwi Chairs Forum joining us online. And joining us, we have Tahuia Bill Hamilton and Apirahama Edwards. It's on, but it's not working. Apirahama, can you hear me? So I think your camera's not working, but I think we'll proceed, given that you are on screen, albeit a sort of a black square, and we've got Tahuia Bill Hamilton with us as well. So let's begin the presentation. We have you for 10 minutes this morning, so I'll hand over to you to start.
Apai, tēnā koutou katoa, ko maua tēnei, ko te Tahuia Bill Hamilton, e whakatakotoa ke nei ngā whakaaro, hei tāpiri ake ki te tāpaitanga kōrero, i tukua e te kāhui hea mana aiwi o te motu, e whakahē nei tēnei pire. He āpititanga anō tēnei ki te pūrongo i puta e te rōpū mahi, i raro mai i te kāhui hea mana aiwi o te motu, e karangahia nei ko maranga mai. I oti a rātau hoki te tahi pūrongo e whakamāra mana i te hohonutanga, i te whānuitanga o tā mātou whakahē i tēnei pire. Ko te wahanga noa kia hau, he hoki rā ki te whakamahara, ki te pūtake o te āwangawanga. Tēnei mea te tiriti o Waitangi, e hara i te pepa noiho. He mana, he tapu, ona. Ka mutu he ki taurangi. He ki taurangi e whakamāra mana i te wahanga, ki te tinoranga tiratanga, o tira i te wahanga, ki te mana kāwana. Ko te mate ki tēnei pire, ko tōna anga, he huri ki te whakapokake i taua ki taurangi. He huri ki te takahi i te tinoranga tiratanga. Ka mutu ko tana aronga, kia nui ake te mana, o te mana kāwana ki tēnei whenua, he tāmi tonu atu, he whakaiti tonu i te tinoranga tiratanga. I kona ka takahitia, te ki taurangi i oti, i roto i te tiriti o Waitangi, kia mau tonu, te tinoranga tiratanga te iwi Māori, ki runga ki ona whenua, ki ona kāinga, i ona taonga katoa. Tēnei mea te tinoranga tiratanga, he mana tuku iho, he taura tā ngaingai. A te Māori ki tēnei whenua, ki Aotearoa, e ki ai te Māori he tangata whenua. Koa pēhea mai, te pire nei o tira te mana kāwana, e kore e tāia e koutou. He rā mana te takahi atu, te whakakahore tonu atu. Kua tahirau waru te kau Māori matau, te mana kāwana e au pēhi ana, e whakahāwe ana, e takahini ana i te tinoranga tiratanga. Tēnei rā mātou e whakahē nei i tēnei pire, me te kiake ka Toitu ko te tiriti, ka Toitu ko te tinoranga tiratanga. Ka kāpura tonu ki runga ki tēnei whenua, haere a ke i roto i o mātou iri whakaheke. Tēnei mātou e aki nei te kāwanatanga, kia tahuri mai i te au piki, i te wahanga kia koe, kia noho tika, i tēnei whenua. O tira, hei paenga mo Aotearoa putano. Ka tira te wahanga kia au, ka tuku atu kia koe e kara e peo.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koe apere hama, ka puta mai tō kōrero, no reira koutou rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Bishop Bennett called the treaty a promise of two peoples to take the best possible care of each other. Our rangatira have honoured that promise, but the Crown has not. As a treaty educator, I'm often asked, did rangatira know what a treaty is? My reply is always, yes, they did, and they still do. However, I doubt the Crown knows what a treaty is, because for the past 185 years, 8 generations now, Jenny, our whānau have experienced racism, colonisation, discrimination, and breaches by our parliaments. This treaty principles bill is no exception. It's unprincipled. It is as bad as the legislation of the 1860s and 1880s that sought to smash the rangatiratanga. The treaty story for our whānau for the past 185 years is the story of protest and resistance, and it will continue until the Crown honours its treaty obligations. This select committee has an opportunity to recommend to government how that can happen. Fortunately, you have us to provide you with solutions. Please look at the last page of our statement. It is really important that this bill is withdrawn immediately. We seek for the treaty articles to be recognised as non-negotiable obligations. Treaty principles go all over the place, and unless those principles like partnership, participation, and protection are actually recognised as obligations, our treaty relationship is going to always be in trouble. The articles will help us move forward together. It's also important, what this has shown us is that there's a massive amount of ignorance in our country about Te Tiriti, and it is important that we facilitate nationwide education on treaty. And I recommend that perhaps we start with Parliament and the public service. What will help this sort of nonsense from coming up again is probably the development of a written constitution grounded in he whakaputanga and Te Tiriti, particularly if that constitution is developed from the communities upwards through constitutional treaty conversations. We have an opportunity now to accelerate progress towards 2040 goals when we can celebrate 200 years of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and bring those promises that people like Jenny Shipley have talked about and the leaders of our iwi and Bishop Manu Bennett of our people taking the best possible care of each other. The other thing that is really important about Te Tiriti is that it prevents or protects us from exploitation, which really is behind this treaty principles bill, the exploitation of our environment and of our people. So those are some solutions that we could work together on. And the iwi chairs, National Iwi Chairs, is very, very keen to strengthen the relationship and strengthen how the Crown can honour the treaty before 2040. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you both. We've got time for questions. We've got one from Huhana Linden and then Todd Stevenson.
Tēnā hoki koe te heamana a Perahama o tira matua Bill, mō tēnei wāhi kōrero mō tātou. I'd like to go to the specific recommendations from the national iwi chairs, and in particular around the resourcing and the need for us to really accelerate the conversation around te tiriti, he whakaputanga. And, you know, we've got structures and we've had opportunities to start that, whether it's localised curriculum within education, but also wider within our community, towards, of course, as you've recommended, developing a written constitution grounded in he whakaputanga me te tiriti o Waitangi. This is a priority for national iwi chairs that you put forward to the committee. Is that correct?
Aye.
And what would that look like, Matua?
Well, there are lots of opportunities. You know, this treaty principles bill has created an interest in the treaty that we probably haven't had in the past, and it provides an opportunity, you know, for us to do better in schools, because schools have been part of the colonising tool, but also better in communities where I think there's an appetite for community conversations about the treaty. And I think the process would be through conversations, perhaps some education, but leave that to the schools and the institutions. But I think there's an opportunity for community conversations. We had one of those in Otaki recently, and people found that process was safe, and it removed a lot of fear, and it provided a lot of information to people. We do need to remove fear in this discussion, in this kaupapa.
Can I ask one supplementary?
No, that's probably the time for this afternoon. We are this morning, so we are running over. Look, kia ora. Thank you both for your submission and your time this morning. We do appreciate you being with the committee to provide your presentation. Thanks, folks. That brings our public hearings to a conclusion this morning. So can I just thank the members of the gallery for your attendance and your patience